It was a crisp autumn morning in Manhattan when Daniel West stepped into his boss's glass-walled office. From the 34th floor, the city buzzed below, indifferent to the storm brewing inside him. He had rehearsed this moment 100 times, but now as the door clicked shut behind him, his heart pounded like a drum in his chest. Daniel was about to make the most difficult decision of his life, to walk away from everything. At 38, he wasn't some kid chasing a wild dream. He had built a solid career at one of the top investment firms in New York. He had respect, financial security, and a mentor who believed in him. But for months, something inside him had been stirring, a whisper that had grown into a roar. There's something more. I want to leave, he said, barely above a whisper. His boss leaned back, eyes narrowing. Leave? You're on track for partner. What could possibly be worth throwing this away? Daniel inhaled deeply. I want to start an online bookstore. The room fell silent. Then came a polite smile, almost pitying. That's a great idea for someone who doesn't already have a great job like you. Daniel nodded slowly. He had expected this. The skepticism, the concern disguised as logic. But it didn't shake him. Because in that moment, clarity cut through the fear, sharper than ever before. He realized there are three paths people take in life. A job to survive. A career to succeed. But a calling sets your soul on fire. And once you've heard that call, going back is no longer an option. As he walked out of that office, uncertainty pressed down on him like a heavy coat. But underneath it, there was something else, a quiet exhilaration. He didn't know where the path would lead, or if he'd fail miserably. But he knew one thing for certain. If he didn't try, he'd regret it for the rest of his life. And for Daniel West, that was a risk far too great to take.
Absolutely. Here's the fully rewritten part 2, approx of 400 words, capturing a vivid, emotionally engaging, and suspenseful moment designed to resonate deeply with viewers over 40 while staying faithful to your original storyline. The first time Daniel West shared his idea, it wasn't in a sleek office or during a business lunch. It was over coffee at a small kitchen table, late at night. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. Across from him sat his closest friend, someone who had known Daniel since college, through life's ups and downs. Daniel leaned forward, eyes intense, voice low and steady. I'm starting an online bookstore, he said, out of my garage. His friend blinked. A bookstore? Online? Daniel nodded. People will be able to buy any book they want with just a few clicks. No shelves, no staff, just the internet. A silence fell between them, the kind that stretches too long. Then came the laugh, a short, disbelieving chuckle. Daniel, come on, you've got a laptop in a garage. That's not a business, and that kind of money you're talking about, $100 billion? That kind of money doesn't exist. Daniel didn't flinch. He didn't need validation. He wasn't hoping to be believed. He already believed. He saw what they didn't. While others saw a world as it was, Daniel saw a world as it could be. And that vision burned in him like a fire that couldn't be put out. It wasn't arrogance. It was clarity. He knew most people wouldn't understand. Not now. Not yet. Because big ideas always sound ridiculous before they sound brilliant. That's the price of thinking ahead. As the conversation continued, his friend shook his head in half amusement, half concern. You really think people will buy everything online someday? Daniel looked him in the eye. Not just books. One day, everything. Groceries, furniture, clothes. The future is digital, and I'm not waiting for it to arrive. I'm building it. That night, Daniel walked home under the glow of the streetlights, alone with his thoughts. But he didn't feel lonely. He felt alive. Yes, it was risky. Yes, he might fail. But in his heart, he knew the real failure would be not trying at all. Everyone else saw a man with nothing more than a wild dream. Daniel West saw a future, and he had already begun building it. Absolutely. Dưới đây là phần 3 của câu chuyện Daniel West, nối tiếp phần 2, được viết bằng tiếng Anh Mỹ, dài khoảng 400 từ, mang phong cách kể chuyện gay cấn, cảm xúc rõ nét, phù hợp với đối tượng trên 40 tuổi. Daniel couldn't sleep that night. Even after the conversation ended, the laughter of his friend still echoed in his mind. But so did something else, that quiet but relentless voice inside him. The same voice that had followed him every day for the past year, whispering, "You were made for more." The next morning, Daniel sat alone in his car, parked outside the towering office building where he worked. He looked up at the glass windows reflecting the morning sun, the same building he had proudly walked into for nearly a decade. Inside, there was status, comfort, a six-figure salary, an easy path to partner. But inside him, there was war. What if they were right? What if he failed? What if leaving meant not only losing everything, but being labeled a fool by friends, colleagues, even himself? And yet, what if he didn't? Daniel imagined himself at 80. Wrinkled hands, a slower walk. He pictured looking back on this exact moment. Would he be proud that he had stayed safe, or would he regret not taking the leap? He gripped the steering wheel, took a long breath, and made a decision that would change the course of his life forever. That afternoon, he handed in his resignation. His boss stared at him, stunned. "Daniel, you're walking away from the best opportunity of your life." But Daniel smiled calmly and said, "No, I'm walking toward it." He left the building with a cardboard box in his arms and butterflies in his stomach. It was terrifying, liberating, final. But it was also the first time in years that he felt fully alive. The world saw a man giving up a promising career, but Daniel knew better. He wasn't walking away. He was stepping into something far greater, not because it was guaranteed to work, but because it mattered. He had no investors, no blueprint, just an old desk in his garage, a laptop, and an idea so wild most people couldn't wrap their heads around it. But he had something else, a clear reason why. And in the chapters of every great story, that's where the real journey begins. Certainly. Dưới đây là phần 4 của câu chuyện Daniel West, nối tiếp trực tiếp phần 3, vẫn giữ giọng văn kể chuyện truyền cảm, chân thực, giàu cảm xúc và phù hợp với người xem trên 40 tuổi. Độ dài khoảng 400 từ, giữ nguyên mạch truyện và cảm xúc. The garage was colder than Daniel remembered. The day after he left his job, he stood in the center of the dusty space, surrounded by old paint cans, boxes of forgotten memories, and the hum of quiet suburbia. This wasn't a startup office. It was where lawnmowers slept and spiders lived. But to Daniel, it felt like a launch pad. He dragged in an old wooden desk from the basement, wiped it clean, and set his laptop down. That was it. No fanfare, no funding, no guarantees. Just a man, a machine, and a mission. But what made Daniel different wasn't just the risk he took. It was the why behind it. See, Daniel had always been a builder. As a child, he spent his weekends tearing apart radios, building solar ovens from cardboard and foil, even inventing a sibling alert system with bells and fishing wire to protect his room. While other kids were watching cartoons, he was sketching blueprints. Not because someone told him to, but because his mind needed to create. And even as he grew older and climbed the corporate ladder, that part of him never disappeared. It just got quieter, covered by suits and spreadsheets, until one day it refused to be ignored any longer. That first week in the garage, Daniel worked 12-hour days, often forgetting to eat. He coded the first version of his website himself. It was clunky, ugly even, but it worked. He sourced books from local distributors, listed them manually, and began shipping orders with his own two hands. Every package he sent felt like a promise. This is real. This is happening. There were no instant wins, no headlines, no one knocking on his door to invest. Just endless days of uncertainty, late nights of troubleshooting, and the constant echo of self-doubt. But every time the doubt crept in, he reminded himself, this is what building looks like. This is what freedom feels like. It wasn't glamorous. It was gritty. And yet, in that cold garage with sore hands and blurry eyes, Daniel felt more alive than he ever had in a corner office. Because for the first time in his life, he wasn't working for a paycheck. He was building something he believed in. Tất nhiên. Dưới đây là phần 5 của câu chuyện Daniel West, nối tiếp mạch truyện từ phần 4. Vẫn là phong cách kể chuyện truyền cảm, phù hợp với người trên 40 tuổi, văn phong chân thực, cảm xúc và mạnh về chiều sâu nội tâm, dài khoảng 400 từ. Daniel quickly learned that building a dream wasn't just about ideas and effort, it was about endurance. Weeks turned into months. The orders trickled in slowly, almost painfully. Some days, just one or two. Other days, none at all. Each morning, he would open his inbox with a mix of hope and hesitation, bracing for either progress or silence. And still he showed up. He packed every book by hand, printed shipping labels on a secondhand printer, and carried boxes to the post office himself. His hands were often covered in packing tape and ink stains. He had traded polished shoes and catered lunches for sweatshirts and cold coffee. But he had never felt more purpose in his life. What kept him going wasn't momentum, it was mindset. Daniel adopted a philosophy he'd once read in a book about military operations. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. At first, he didn't fully understand it, but now, every day in the garage, it made more sense. Rushing led to mistakes, pushing too hard led to burnout. But showing up consistently, patiently, deliberately, that's what created real traction. He wasn't chasing a quick win. He was building the foundation of something that would last. And the deeper truth? Daniel was learning to respect the process. Most people glamorize success. They think it comes in a flash, a lucky break, a viral moment, an overnight deal. But Daniel was discovering that real success is quieter, slower. It grows beneath the surface before it ever breaks through. During long nights when his body ached and his mind wandered into doubt, Daniel would stop, close his eyes, and imagine the people, the ones who would one day find his site, order their first book, and smile when it arrived. He wasn't just building a company, he was crafting an experience. And somewhere deep down, he believed that the world didn't need another store. It needed a place built with intention, a business rooted in service, not speed, in trust, not trend. Every small order was a seed. Every late night was a brick. And though the tower was invisible to most, Daniel could see it rising, one layer at a time. He wasn't there yet, but he knew he was getting closer. Tuyệt vời. Dưới đây là phần 6 của câu chuyện Daniel West, nối tiếp trực tiếp phần 5. Vẫn giữ đúng phong cách kể chuyện truyền cảm, đầy chiều sâu cảm xúc, phù hợp với người xem trên 40 tuổi. Dài khoảng 400 từ. There was a moment, a quiet one, that Daniel would later look back on as a turning point. It wasn't marked by a big sale or a breakthrough partnership. It happened late one evening, sitting alone in the garage, surrounded by half-sealed boxes and an empty coffee cup. He had just received a message from a customer, just a few lines. "Thank you. My daughter received the book in time for her birthday. She smiled for the first time in weeks." Daniel stared at the screen for a long time. It wasn't about the product anymore. It was about the impact. That message stayed with him, reminding him of something simple but profound. Success isn't about being the best. It's about being useful. People often assume the most successful individuals are the most talented. But Daniel knew better. He wasn't born with a genius-level IQ. He didn't have a famous last name or investors lining up outside his door. What he did have was the power to choose. He chose to start. He chose to keep going. He chose to get up every day and work towards something no one else could see yet. He often said, "We don't get to take credit for our natural gifts. We didn't earn them." But we can be proud of our decisions. We can own our discipline. Talent may open the door, but choice is what keeps you walking through it. Daniel would spend thousands of hours learning about customers, logistics, software, marketing. He failed at things he thought he'd be good at. He stumbled, he misjudged, he overreached, but he kept learning, kept adjusting. And every time something didn't work, he reminded himself, this is part of it. He had long since stopped comparing himself to others. He wasn't trying to win some race. He was trying to become someone. Someone who didn't quit when it got hard. Someone who stood for something more than profit. Because in the end, Daniel didn't want to be remembered for building a website. He wanted to be remembered for making a choice. The kind of choice that, over time, transforms not only a life, but the lives of everyone it touches. Tuyệt đối sẵn sàng. Dưới đây là phần 7 của câu chuyện Daniel West, tiếp nối trực tiếp phần 6, vẫn mang phong cách kể chuyện đầy cảm xúc, sâu sắc, truyền cảm hứng mạnh mẽ, đặc biệt phù hợp với người xem độ tuổi 40 trở lên. Dài khoảng 400 từ. As the months turned into years, the world slowly began to catch up with Daniel West. What had once been seen as foolish, selling books online from a garage, was now gaining traction. Orders increased, reviews trickled in with words like reliable, fast, thoughtful. He hired his first team member, then another. A small warehouse replaced the garage. Yet through all the change, Daniel stayed rooted in the same truth that started it all. The most important things in life are the ones we choose deliberately. He began reflecting often, not on his business metrics, but on his life decisions. In quiet moments, he would ask himself the questions that had guided him from the very beginning. Will I let fear or comfort lead me? Will I follow the crowd or carve my own way? Will I seek ease or meaning? Will I shrink under criticism or rise with conviction? Will I keep my heart guarded or risk love and connection? Will I give up when the climb gets steep or keep pressing forward? Will I live only for myself or live in service to something greater? Daniel believed that the quality of a person's life could be measured not by what they achieve, but by what they choose again and again, especially when no one is watching. He knew that every person faces these questions, whether they acknowledge them or not. And in the end, it's the answers that shape the story of a lifetime. He had made his choice to live boldly, with purpose, with heart. Not because it was easy, but because it was true. And he began to wonder, what if more people stopped waiting for permission? What if more people listened to the quiet voice inside that whispers, "You were made for more"? Daniel's journey wasn't a straight line. It was messy, human, honest, but it was his. And he carried no regret, because he knew with absolute certainty that the biggest risk in life was not taking one at all. Tuyệt vời! Dưới đây là phần 8 của câu chuyện Daniel West, tiếp nối phần 7, vẫn giữ phong cách kể chuyện truyền cảm, giàu chiều sâu, truyền động lực rõ ràng và cảm xúc chân thật, đặc biệt dành cho người xem trung niên trở lên. Độ dài khoảng 400 từ. As Daniel's company continued to grow, success began to follow him. Quietly at first, then suddenly, all at once. Interviews, headlines, features in magazines that once wouldn't return his emails. People started asking him about his secret, the formula, the edge. They wanted to know how he did it. Daniel always gave the same answer, not because it was polished, but because it was real. I focused on creating value. That's it. It wasn't a trick or a shortcut. It wasn't about market timing or clever marketing. It was simpler than that. He built everything around a single question. How can I help people do what they care about? Better, faster, easier? He believed that when you help others create, solve, grow, or feel, you've done something that matters, and it showed. Customers didn't just buy from his company, they talked about it. Referred friends came back because they felt something rare in today's world: authenticity. Daniel never promised to change the world. He just showed up every day and tried to make a corner of it a little better. And ironically, that's exactly what changed everything. He also began mentoring young founders, and they all wanted to know the same thing. How do I find my passion? Daniel would smile gently and say, passion doesn't usually show up at your doorstep like a lightning bolt. It shows up after you've committed, after you've put in the work, after you've stayed when most would quit. He'd lean in and add, if you don't love your work, you won't last. But if you love what your work does for others, that'll carry you farther than talent ever will. Success, he reminded them, is not something you chase. It's something you attract by becoming the kind of person who serves, solves, and stays the course. And in a world obsessed with personal brand and viral fame, Daniel quietly proved that the most powerful legacy is not built on noise, but on usefulness. Because in the end, it wasn't about becoming a billionaire. It was about becoming a builder of value, of trust, and of lives made better by something he chose to create.
Years passed. The small garage that once smelled of cardboard and cold cement was now just a memory, a sacred one. Daniel West had built more than a business. He had built a movement, a quiet revolution of purpose-driven work in a noisy world. One afternoon, during a rare moment of stillness, Daniel stood by the window of his office, a far cry from where he began, watching the sun dip below the skyline. He thought about the early days, the doubts, the long nights, the risks that almost broke him. And he smiled. He wasn't nostalgic for the struggle, but grateful for it, because that was where he had been shaped, where the noise of the world was replaced by the voice within, where the man chasing stability became the man building significance. He had lived long enough to see the tides turn, not just for him, but for the world. The internet had become what he always believed it would be, a gateway to connection, commerce, and creation. It was, he often said, the greatest time to be alive. If Newton, Galileo, or Da Vinci could have picked an era to be born, he once told a room full of young entrepreneurs, they would have picked this one. Right now. right here. The opportunities were endless. The only question that remained, the one he always left people with, was this: what will you do with it? Because Daniel knew every generation has its tools, but not every generation chooses to use them with courage. Not everyone chooses to leave comfort for calling. Not everyone chooses to follow the quiet, persistent voice that whispers, "You were made for more." But for those who do, they don't just change their lives, they change the world, one bold choice at a time. Daniel West never sought fame. He sought freedom. Freedom to build, to serve, to live with conviction. And in doing so, he left behind something no stock price or title could ever measure. He left behind a story, one that reminds us all that the future belongs, always, to the ones who dare to believe in it before anyone else does.